Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. So I do want to clarify what Professor Cao said this morning. He said first time he came to Hong Kong had very bad memory because he lost all the money to me in Texas Hold'em, okay? So that was when I was in the US. After I came to Hong Kong, I realized, we're not in the business of taking money away from people. Okay, so I actually welcome you all to visit HKUST, and I promise you we will not take your money away. Okay, in fact, we might even give you some money. Okay, so I also want to clarify. Actually, he lost his shirt essentially, and he didn't have time to take a taxi and pay his cheap hotel, which was I think it didn't take credit cards. So I actually paid him back the money. Okay, so. Anyway, all right, so today the topic is scatter and transform, but really I want to talk about art stylometry and art investigation. So the title is slightly different from the one I get, but it's the same meaning. I don't know, actually the use of artificial intelligence and data analysis for art has gathered quite a bit publicity lately. Okay, so I'll show you some example. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I read in MIT Technology Review that somebody using essentially a neural network to generate a portrait. It's using a particular GAN network, and that one was put up for auction. So the creator thought they might be able to fetch maybe a few $1,000s for that particular creation. I look at the creation, I mean, I would not buy it, okay? But anyway, it was interesting. And it ended up fetching 400,000 US dollars in the auction. So, and this was based on the neural network done in Stanford by a high school student. Okay. So, we can all get into this business in some way. Okay. And I also want to tell you a little bit about why I got into this particular problem. Because about 5 years ago, a collector, which I'll mention later on, sent me an email in Boston asking me, well, I got this picture from, this painting, this drawing by what I believe to be by Raphael. But the other art collectors don't seem to fully agree with me. Some agree with me, some don't. And can you use mathematics to shed some light on this? Okay. So and I'll get to that. Okay. But before getting all these into this, let me just start with some mathematics. Okay. Okay. So first, the deep learning is the rage of today. Okay, so let me just quickly go into some basics, and my talk will be light on mathematics. Okay, so I think the details we can all go and read the papers, and it's a very simple. So here we have a classification problem, which a lot of these neural networks, deep learning, are for. Here, let's just be simple. Let's have two classes. Either is Raphael or non-Raphael. Okay, so we're going to label them as 1 and 2. So 1, let's say, would be Raphael, and 2 would be non-Raphael. So the idea is we're giving a bunch of data, and the data is represented by the so-called feature vector. So here F, okay, is a feature vector. And this feature vector can be latent. Okay, it doesn't have to be the original. Let's say if you have a picture, it doesn't have to be the picture itself. Can be other kind of some latents or some other data derived from this original data. So this is called a feature. And of course, we're given a bunch of training data. So these are the data that we already know whether belong to one class or the other. So this is a standard setup everyone is familiar with. Okay, and for a long time, these so-called linear classifiers were very popular. They were, dominating the scene, like support vector machine, for instance. Okay, so simple case here is we have, a bunch of points here representing class 1, and we have a bunch of points here. These are representing class 2. And we try to separate them using a hyperplane. Okay? And you can see this is equivalent to essentially taking a linear, there is a vector here that you use that to in the product, the points. And if it's above certain threshold, which means it's above the hyperplane, you say it's class 1 and it's class 2. This is a sort of the, very standard. Actually, this describes the support vector machine, for instance, here. Okay, when the dimension is very large, when you have a lot of features, actually this is very effective. Okay? Now, of course, if the dimension is low, you do run into problems. Okay, so then there is once you perform this on your training set and you try to minimize certain loss function, and then you train this model, and after you have done that, you say, okay, I can apply this to the data which I do not have the label and try to determine whether it's a Raphael or, class 1 or class 2. Okay, so this is the standard thing. The popular ones are, I just list a few here, the linear LDA, linear discriminant analysis, SVM, and Perceptron. So this is a simple linear perceptron, which is used, in all the neural network models. It essentially, this is very, very simple. Okay, just think about a single neuron. Okay? So you have a bunch of inputs. These are the features, xi, meaning the features, okay? So then you take a linear combination. Of course, the first one is just 1. So it's an inhomogeneous linear, okay? So because we assume x0 is 1, okay? And then think about it. When you see a certain picture, you got some reaction. A neuron would get a reaction that in this model it says it's a combination. It's triggered by a combination of features. Okay? Once you have the feature, afterwards, okay, you got this number, you got this value here. Then we take the sign. Okay, we say, okay, if it's positive, we say fire. Okay, if it's negative, we say not fire. If it's positive, we say it's class 1. If it's not, if it's negative, we say class 2. Okay, so this is a simple linear perceptron. And this is a basis, well, sort of building block of the neural networks. Okay, and here you can see, I'm very glad that Professor Fang Liu had already gave an overview of the neural network, so I wouldn't go detail. Basically, it's a bunch of every time you have these neurons, and each one can be seen as a perceptron. Okay? And then you do the activation, and here, of course, we don't just use a sign; we use something typically slightly different. Okay, so basically, so you have linear, then you do an activation function. Can be a sign, can be something else, can be absolute value. So there are a lot of different ways you can take it. Then you just different layers. You can have a deep network where you have layers of neurons. Okay, so this is a basically neural network. I'm going to skip here. Everybody knows. Okay, so so what is the problem? The problem is this is so complicated. If you want to train a network, it's very complicated because you have so many coefficients to optimize. Okay, so a simpler model would be to take the convolutional neural network where the linear transformation are simply convolutions. This considerably simplified the model, okay, and it's proven to be very effective. Sometimes to have too many variables, you got into these certainly the overfitting problem. So here you could actually considerably simplify the model, okay, and it's proven to be very effective, okay. All right. So now I want to get to the scattering transform, because this is something probably a bit less known to you. Nevertheless, scattering transform, I actually like to think about it as a convolutional network, except when you go with the standard convolutional network, you have these filters, okay? So you convolve with a filter, okay? And here in the scattering transform, think about this. There's I'm going to skip a lot of details, but the general idea is you take a wavelet filter. Okay, so your filter is, you're still a convolutional network in some way. Okay, but it's the filters are wavelets. Okay, and another way to look at it, which I actually want to usually tell people that, because think about what is a scattering transform. You have a data. Do one wavelet transform, okay? When you have a wavelet transform, take the wavelet transform, take the absolute value, okay? So the activation function here, I'm going to skip. So activation function is simply the absolute value, or the modulus, okay? Then you get a bunch of coefficients. Then you take the wavelet transform of that, and then you take the absolute value again. Then just do layers. So this, you would have several layers of absolute value of wavelet coefficient. And you put all these together, that gives you the scattered transform, essentially, okay? So in practice, we typically use a continuous wavelet transform. And we also have direction. So, I don't think I want to get into the details here, but let's say I have a picture. In the standard wavelet transform, I have take a mask, or the filter, wavelet filter, and I'm going to convolve with this whole thing. But in scattering transform, instead of just convolving it with it, I'm going to rotate a little bit, then convolve, and rotate a little bit again, and convolve. Usually we rotate like 8 times, okay, typically. So you get more. Okay? And the other thing is, you also have a dilation factor. Okay? In one layer, I'm using a very wide wavelet, and then in the next layer, I use the same wavelet, but I shrink it a little bit. So it's like a multi-scale thing. Okay? So this is the basic idea. So this was developed by Millard's group. Okay? So that's what I'm saying. This big J represent how many layers do you want. And soon when you perform scattering transform, because of the oversampling, because you have the rotation involved, okay, soon you will realize you cannot do too large a J because of exponential growth. Okay, so usually we do like J equal to 4, 5. That's the maximum you do. Okay, rotation, as I say, you usually do 8 of them. Okay. So these are the scattering coefficients. You put all these things together, and that's a scattering transform. Okay, that's the gist. Okay, forget about let's not worry too much about the details. Okay, and this is an illustration. How do you get? You can see soon you get the explosion of data, basically. Okay, that's why you don't want to have too many layers. Okay. All right. And it has some interesting properties. The stability, of course, if 2 data are not too far away, you don't want the features to be very far off. Okay. Oh, by the way, we use the scattering transform coefficients as a feature. Okay. So when I take an image for our work, we don't actually input the whole image into the neural network, whatever machinery you do classification. Instead, we use the scattering coefficients to do it. Okay, so the scattering transform has stability and has some kind of translation invariance, which is sort of, when you translate it, you can see it doesn't really change the numbers. It does change the position, but it doesn't change the feature value. Okay. so it also has something called the stability deformation. If you deform the data a little bit, let's say geometrically, instead of, you tilt it a little bit and think, it doesn't change the feature that much, okay? So these are some of the basic properties. I do want to say one thing. What's the advantage of scattering transform versus neural network? Or deep network. So what they discovered was, and actually we also did a lot of experiment, it's absolutely true, that is if your data size is small, actually scattering transform does tend to work better. Okay, there is a lot of testing being done. But once you reach certain certain volume in terms of data, deep learning actually works better. Okay, so for image net, for instance, the performance was done for MNIST, for instance. When you use, you take a subsample, actually scattering transform tend to work better than the deep learning network, a deep neural network. On the other hand, when you get all the data in, okay, when you have millions of data, scattering tend to sort of stabilize, doesn't improve as much. Okay, but in general, they're actually quite comparable. For many data sets, especially if the data is small, actually scattering transform is very effective. So I highly recommend you to consider scattering transform when you have an application where you don't have a lot of data. In fact, I would even suggest for medical data, you really don't have a lot of data, and sometimes don't overlook scattering transform. Okay. So now let's get to my main, the main topic of my presentation. So this is for art authentication. Okay. So this was an image I got. Okay. So this was about a little over 5 years ago. I got this request from Ed Rosser, who is a collector in Boston, and he asked me. I don't know how he found me. I think because I had some work in this area, so he probably asked a few people, and people said, oh, why don't you see whether mathematics can help you. So he was trying to find a way to tell people this is a Raphael. Okay, so he asked me whether we could tell this particular drawing is a Raphael. I'm not an artist. I'm not an art historian. For me, this looks like a Raphael, okay, because but my opinion doesn't count, okay. So I say, okay, we'll be happy to look at. He said, how much money I'll pay you? I say, we don't ask for this. I'll just do analysis, but provided you let the students, you're willing to share, allow the students to use the data. And he also provided training sets. Okay, so he has access to a lot of catalogs, so he provided the training sets for us, which I'll get to later on. Okay, but I want to use this opportunity to say a few things about the art authentication using mathematics. This is not it's relatively, I wouldn't say new, but it doesn't happen quite often. However, it did happen in one very high profile case, okay, so which I'll explain, okay. So many of you know the American abstract painter named Jackson Pollock. In fact, there was a movie made about him. So he makes paintings like this, okay. Now, this, when I was a graduate student, I look at, when I was in China, of course, everything was, we grew up during the Cultural Revolution. Every painting was like Chairman Mao and, all these. But I went to the U.S. when I was at Harvard. We had a museum, the Fogg Museum, going in. And we're so used to these portraits, okay? So classical oil paintings. But so it was a shock when I saw something like this. Okay, this is by Jackson. I say, how could anyone consider this an art? Okay, this was total BS to me. You know, in fact, I even thought this was show the decadence of Western culture, civilization, whatever. But you know, over the years, I changed my opinion. Now I feel I got much more emotional response from pictures like the paintings like this. Okay, I don't, you know, when you show me another angel's painting, I feel nothing. Okay, but this one, you know, I feel it was really a masterpiece. Actually, Jackson Pollock's painting currently ranked number 4 in terms of auction in the price. Okay, so one of his painting was sold for close to $1 billion, not quite, a few hundred million. Okay, U.S. dollars. Okay, so each one of the Jackson Pollock painting is worth, I would say, no less than 40 million U.S. dollars. Okay, so which was why it became a very big event when somebody claimed he discovered 23 paintings by Jackson Pollock in his basement in Long Island. So I will get to that. Among those was this one, okay, and this one. Okay, I mean, what do you think? These Jackson Pollock? In fact, people try to imitate Jackson Pollock. But just wasn't, you know, it's very hard. I mean, in fact, a lot of people think you just take some paint and pour on the canvas, or dip into the brush and, you know, sort of doing this. You can try. It just wasn't look as good as Jackson Pollock. Okay, so what happened was this was by Alex Matter. Okay, so this is Alex Matter here. He was a kid. Okay, so Alex, he lives in Philadelphia, but he had a storage house in Long Island because his parents used to live in Long Island. Okay, and his parents are very good friend of Jackson Pollock. Okay, so this was Jackson Pollock. Okay, that's Alex's mother. Okay, and so it was not very surprising that Pollock could have left several paintings with the family. Okay, and they certainly look like Jackson Pollock. And so when these were discovered, the historians all believe there were 2 Jackson Pollock. Remember, each one is at least, I mean, you would estimate that around at least half a, 50 million, okay? The art collectors are sort of on the opposite side. They don't believe these were Jackson Pollock. Their argument was never in history you have more than 2 paintings by the same, painter discovered in one place at the same time. Okay, so they were split. So Lee Krasner, the widow of Jackson Pollock at the time, commissioned a mathematician, actually a theoretical physicist, named Richard Taylor, not the famous Richard Taylor at Harvard. Okay, it's the same name, but he's a theoretical physicist, sort of a mathematician type in Oregon, and asked him to see whether he could mathematically decide these were paintings by Pollock. Why Richard Taylor? Because Richard Taylor previously used fractal geometry. He treated it as a fractal, and using fractal geometry to actually to come up with what he called 8 criteria for Jackson Pollock. He said all Jackson Pollock paintings satisfy these 8 mathematical criteria. None of the fakes or imitations he had analyzed satisfy all 8 of them. Okay, and he's seen a lot of. I don't know whether I believe him, but we did try to duplicate his result at the time, and I had a little bit of trouble duplicating, but at least he was very confident. So they sent the scans to him, high quality scan, and a few days later Taylor said he's ready to make a press conference to announce his finding. And he stood in the podium and he said, he analyzed them, they're all fakes, okay? And you remember, there's 50 million to maybe 500, okay? So this was, it got the family very angry, and art historians who were on the other side started to attack him. And right the day after, there was a famous art historian named Alan Landau start to have her own press conference. She said Richard Taylor was a charlatan. This was totally wrong. In her opinion, this was Jackson Pollock. So this was, this was for a long time no conclusion until one day the family peeled just a tiny bit of paint of one of the paintings and sent it to Harvard chemistry lab. They discovered after the spectral analysis that the paint came out exactly 1 year after Jackson Pollock's death. There was no such a paint. This was a new paint. So essentially now everyone believed this was not Jackson Pollock. Okay. So this was a successful example where mathematics actually was used to at least to authenticate, okay, partially, providing some evidence, let's say. Okay, so we got into this, and so we decided now our method has been is much more advanced than the time Richard Taylor used his method. So can we actually do this using some of our standard data analysis techniques? So of course the study of art authentication has started way before our experiment. In fact, I was one of the first person to have done work in this area. Okay, but that was actually significant, a few years ago. So there were two. There was a standard database, which was a Van Gogh painting. This was produced, actually supplied by the museum, by the Van Gogh Museum from the Netherlands. Okay, so this was a purely research. Purely research project. They want to know whether from using machine learning or using data analysis, one can distinguish Van Gogh or not Van Gogh. Okay, so they gave 64 Van Gogh paintings and 15 forgeries. Okay, including some, in fact, they even supplied paintings by students who imitated Van Gogh. Okay, so then we got the Raphael database, okay, including that picture to be determined. Okay. And these are some of the sample. Okay, Raphael. This looks like a Raphael, but it's not a Raphael. Okay, and Van Gogh. This looked like Van Gogh. Everyone could see this looked like Van Gogh, but it's not Van Gogh. Okay, so what do we do? Okay, so essentially the state of the art at the time was, basically all wavelet based, or using some kind of, hidden Markov model or SVM, and for the Van Gogh database. Okay, the accuracy was all not very good. In fact, it wasn't, I would say it's respectable, but not great. It's all less than 90%, and that 90% including, you put all things together. For instance, because there are so many more Van Gogh than non-Van Gogh, okay, if you just guess everyone to be Van Gogh, you already have like a 70% of accuracy, okay? So you actually need to, look at the F1 score. I don't know what was the F1 score. So because the data size is also very small, then most people just do the one layer of features. So we say, okay, let's try to use to see whether scatter and transform, because there's a small amount of data, maybe that's exactly what scatter and transform is good for. Okay, so we decided to use scatter and transform to obtain the features. Okay, so instead of guessing, we use a scatter and transform. We actually use a large J. I think equal to try different one, 3, 4, 3 layer, 4 layer, all the way to 7 is too many. There's definitely you don't need this many, okay? And then we take the features, we simply use as being typical practice from the Malak group, from all the other, we just use a linear classifier like SVM or PCA type of thing, okay? So it turned out to be really good. Then of course we realized if you add a sparse version of SVM or the linear discriminant analysis, you can actually improve the results, okay? So we were, let me just show you, these are the features we got. As in most of the, in all these analysis, because a brush stroke or the stroke is very central to the feature. So typically you don't work with the full image, it's very, very large size. So we cut them into patches, okay? So if each patch, if you use patches itself as the, trying to do classification, that's one way to do it. Okay, and you can see you get these kind of accuracy. It doesn't mean the larger the patch, the better. Okay, and the other is you can have a voting scheme. You can cut the image into many, many patches, and then you perform this classification on each patch. Then you have a voting scheme. Okay, this usually improves the accuracy significantly. Well, significant means it goes from, say, 90 to 95. This is already very significant, okay? This was this is the performance you could see, okay? So this is the Van Gogh, and you can see for the Van Gogh, actually the features that's being used is very large, okay, for the classification, and for the Raphael you have a little bit you use fewer features, but the accuracy is actually very high for Raphael. We discovered that Raphael is a much easier database to work with. It's much easier for classification. Okay, so the performance, you see the performance, the accuracy is very high. In fact, for Raphael is 100%. Okay, so these are some of the comparison with the state of the art. You can see ours. We were able to get 96% for Van Gogh. Okay. Way above the other, okay? And these are the features. As I say, you have 8 directions, so these are the, just show you where we select the features. So pretty much, so I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. And for Raphael, you can see far fewer features are selected. Okay? So, so finally, so basically, okay, our story is for that particular painting, we actually, in our data analysis, is consistent with Raphael. Okay, I was very hesitant to tell Ed that we can prove it's Raphael because we can't. But what I can tell him is our finding is the style is consistent with Raphael. Okay. In fact, we're not the only one, and we give this to students using different methods. They all reach the same conclusion. So I send it to Tom. I say to Ed, Ross, to Ed, and I say, well, this is what we find. I don't know, maybe there are other methods we could try. Would you like us to try some other method? He said, no, this is great. Don't need. He is afraid that if we try different methods, then the conclusion may change. Okay. So anyway, lastly, I want to spend just a few minutes on neural style transfer. Okay. So many of you have seen this. This is a typical scene, work from deep neural network. So basically, I can take our iconic red bird in HKUST and combine with Starry Night by Van Gogh and to come up with something like this. Okay, so this is a very it's actually it appeared a few years ago. Okay. So how do you do this? Okay, it's actually fairly simple. Okay, so but it's very clever. So basically, you take the features, okay, and then you do the correlation. Okay, features can be viewed as the sort of basically the feature. Okay, so this is representing the data. The correlation, what they view this as a style. Okay, so they view correlation as a style. Okay, so now you have two images. One is a photo. You want the painting to be close to the photo in terms of content, but you want the style to be close to Van Gogh. Okay, so what do? You try to take the, okay, so here is a loss function. So you want the, your creation to be on the content-wise as close to the content of your original as, okay, so you want to fit the content of your photo. However, you also want to add a loss function that say your style has to be very close to Van Gogh. Okay? So in the end, you come up with a weighted loss function, which is partially fitting the style and partially fitting the content. Okay? And then you just do this, and that's what you get. Okay. So we're thinking, well, can we do this with scattering transform? And it turned out you can. Okay. So you can do exactly the same thing. Okay. Slightly more complicated in this case. Basically, the one of the things, I mean, for neural network is very difficult to invert it, so you have to train another network to do this. Okay, so for scattering transform, you can use phase retrieval to actually invert the whole thing. Okay, so we say maybe we could use some of the phase retrieval techniques to invert this this stylo transfer. Okay, so actually it turned out to be far more difficult. So whatever we present here is very preliminary. You can see it's far from being perfect. But I want to throw this out. So if you're interested, please, I'll be happy to discuss it. Okay. So you still the same thing. You take the style, okay, or you take the correlation, which is style, and you whiten it basically by removing, sort of. This part, okay, so you make it, you whiten it, and this is the whitened correlation, okay, and then you combine the two style, the correlation together. One is the content, one is the style. So you have, because I have two images, I have the Van Gogh, I have the photo, okay, so you make the same combination, then you put back the you more or less put back the style of the original image, okay? And this gives you a style transfer, and later you want to invert this whole thing, okay? Basically, this is what you want, okay? And we use some kind of phase retrieval method, which is, it's not ideal. It's also slow, but it seemed to be okay. This is the result we got. For instance, this is a Monet, I think. This looked like a Picasso to me. So we had these two photos, and you apply the style, you got something like this. Okay, not perfect, but certainly you see something. Okay, you see some. I guess you can sort of see there's the impact of style. Now you wonder what happened. Why don't you use color images? Well, here's the problem. We could not get the color right. Okay, so this is another topic for research. It appears to be quite challenging. So now we also think maybe this whole approach of using phase retrieval for inversion is wrong. Maybe we should also train some kind of neural network to do this. Okay. So anyway, this is just some thoughts for future work if you're interested. And finally, I want to do some shameless promotion. So there is so Yao had a journal called Geometry, Imaging and Computation. Okay, and it wasn't, because the scope was too narrow, he wants to change it. So we all feel this should be a, in data science now is so broad, so let's make it more broad, but focusing on the mathematical, on the mathematical science side. Okay, so he said he wanted me to help him, so he asked me to basically launch this whole thing. Okay, so I do some shameless. We're still asking people, and maybe some of you will also be asked. I want to make this a young people's journal. For especially the editorial board, I like to get a lot of young people in. It's of course new, so please in the future help us. Select submitting your paper there. Okay, I'll personally take care of it. Okay, and I think I'll end here. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks for a very interesting talk. So now we have plenty of time for questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for the very interesting talk. As we know, for example, in the case of GANs, if you have a very good classifier, you're halfway to constructing a very good generator.
Right.
So I don't have any old paint that I would like to use to generate a Pollock picture, but how far are we from constructing good generators of images of famous, let's say?
This is actually a very good question. There are a lot of work in this area. I told you the $400,000 auction. This was generated by a GAN network. I don't think it was actually very good. So, on the other hand, this seemed to be the direction people are moving to. I don't think, for instance, these neural style transfer to me is very interesting, but they are still based on something that is existing. Okay, you have a Van Gogh, you have a photo, and I would question, how really interesting it can be. So the GAN network, actually, I seen the images generated by the same Stanford lab by this high school student. He must be an undergraduate now. He collect all the nude paintings, and then he started to generate these nude paintings of from GAN. It looks very interesting. In fact, if you recall, a lot of them don't look like human, but they look like some kind of some object, but it's sort of erotic kind of object. You remember there was an American photographer named Edward Weston. Okay, he's a very famous Edward Weston. Is very famous. His specialty was photograph pepper. Okay, he was very poor, so he buy these pepper on the market and get them back, take these beautiful erotic photos. This pepper looked like a nude, person. And these became classics. And I feel like some of the generated images look like these type of things. So they're very interesting. But I think, using GAN, that's probably the way to go. And we have, people have been working on a GAN version, and in fact, I also asked my students look into GAN version of scattering transform, but so far it hasn't been successful. Yeah.
Do you think you can use technique to recover the dynamics of the new where the print is started, where it's finished?
That's a very, very interesting question. I never thought about this, but this, it's, I don't know. Okay, so because for Jackson Pollock, he seems to have a tendency to start from somewhere. I was told like some certain area of a canvas, but I don't know. This is a very good question. Yeah.